Hi, this is Dave with Taboo Customs. Today we are working on a 2012 GMC Sahara. We're going to be installing a crossmember kit here that will place this crossmember right here. So first one behind the rear axle. This kit will apply to 07 to 14 GMC and Chevy 1500s. So this crossmember right here is the front cross member for where your spare tire winch is mounted. And it's also the rear shock, because you're going to have shocks that are probably angled like this on the passenger side. One will be angled forward, driver's side, one will be angled rear. We're going to be replacing this rear one here. So let's take a little bit closer look at this cross member, then we'll take a look at the kit. Well, it's pretty evident why we're replacing this cross member. And I'll be honest with you, this is not incredibly common. We do see this from time to time, obviously, but for instance, out of the last 10 trucks we've done, this is the first one that's been like this. So right now we'd say, I don't know, maybe 1 in 10. That cross member there is the fuel tank cross member. That is incredibly common. Most common failure for these trucks. I'd almost bet every one of those in the rust belt, if I take a needle scaler to it, maybe I may not look that bad, but I'll put a hole in it. Anyway, so what can happen with this if you let it go too long? We've had this happen and trucks come in like this, but you can see here how this has already started to crack down here. Here is where your shock mount. So with the force back and forth on your shock, you can actually rip this crossmember section out, and then your shock will be banging off the bottom of your bed. We've had a truck or two come in like that. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to go in, we're going to completely cut this crossmember out, take this out, cut it out of the frame, then we're going to go in and we're going to install something a fair bit stronger in here to replace this crossmember and get it back to where we've got the structural integrity that we need. Now, as for our kit, we are actually going to have, well, right now we've got two kits. We've got the kit that is just these plate parts down here. And we've got the kit that's the tube and the plate parts. And let me explain real quick why. Now, we are using a 2-inch square tube. We use 3/16 thick wall. The tube that originally came in your truck is going to be a 3-inch round tube, and it's going to have maybe an 1/8 inch wall, probably more like 10 gauge or 12 gauge. Now, the reason we went with the square tube is one, much easier to find than your 3-inch tube. You can obviously go with the 3-inch tube, but the 2-inch square tube 3/16 wall is going to be more than sufficient for this application. It does slightly change your spare tire. It'll sit a little bit at an angle, not going to hurt anything. But beyond that, the main reason is the availability of 2-inch square tube, because that's why we have two kits. We have two kits because it's honestly a whole lot cheaper to ship you this. If we ship you that and this, which we will, the shipping to go to a 48-inch box versus a 12 by 6 by, I don't know, maybe 3 box, much different. You can get this tube locally at a weld shop, steel sales, almost anywhere, and it will save you money. So we give you that option. Now, on Amazon and eBay especially, we're probably going to have to sell the whole kit because it's hard to explain that, but on our website you should be able to find both kits, unless, caveat is, someday we might decide, hey, we're only going to sell one or the other. We'll see. Anyway, running through the kit, obviously we've got our crossmember tube here. We've got a couple of caps, and we'll talk about those in a second a little bit more. Then we've got our plates. Now, a lot of times with these cross members, the frame in the back is usually pretty good. We have seen some that do have issues. So if you have one of those that do have issues, get a hold of us. We have more custom kits we can do for you, but more than likely this applies to most people that will have the issue that this truck has. We've got a couple of outside plates, a couple of inside plates. This here are all of the shock mount to recreate our shock mount, and we'll run through that whenever we go through the install. Now let's talk a little bit more about these caps. We're going to recommend using these caps. However, some people may want to recreate these holes that are on top of the crossmember, and those holes are for the wire harness that runs across here, runs over to probably probably an ABS sensor over there. We will just zip tie those to the crossmember. However, if you want to drill a hole and actually put the zip tie pieces that you can stick down in there, if you do that, we do not recommend capping the crossmember, because you don't want the crossmember to fill with water and then basically do the same thing it did here, rust from the inside out. For us though, we are going to cap it. That way we're trying to prevent stuff from getting in there and staying, because that's honestly what happens. I mean, this one here is, just if I reach my hand in there, just filled with dirt. And so that is what leads to a lot of these cross members rusting out as they get filled up, and then they just don't dry out. So anyway, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to start cutting this cross member off. First, I might take a needle scaler to this and show you just how bad it gets, and then we'll come back, cut these off. There's going to be a couple of options to taking this cross member out. For this weld right here, we'll just take a hard wheel, cut right there. It'll give you a nice surface then to weld this back to your new tube. Then we will probably go in and either, if we get our plasma out, go and take the plasma and just cut around here. You could also cut these off right here, take a hole saw and cut those out there. But anyway, we've got to get this whole tube out of the frame, however you so choose. Now let's talk a little bit about prep for this. We obviously will pull the fuel tank, pretty much pull the fuel tank no matter what we're welding on these frames, but 90% of the time we have to do kits in that area as well. And chances are, if you're replacing this, you pull your fuel tank, you're going to find issues with your frame right there. You're going to find issues with that fuel tank cross member, that rear one. Sorry, it's just how it is with Chevys and the rust belt. You really can't, it'd be really hard to replace this. You really can't replace this without pulling the bed, unfortunately. So to pull the bed, we'll pull the hitch, pull the bumper. Not too difficult. Usually the hitches, the bumpers do come off pretty cleanly, which is nice. We will at times have some of the bed bolts, like one or two, spin up in the bed. Usually though, they'll come out pretty cleanly. For like a short bed, I know it's at least 6 bolts. Long bed is 8. Regular cab, I can't remember if it's 8 or 6, but it's either one of those two. So not too difficult. Just make sure you do get the wiring and stuff disconnected back here before you go and try to pick it up and get it off of there. In general, of course, removing the shock, removing the spare tire so that weight is not hanging on there. Basically at that point you're ready. We will probably also remove the exhaust, but probably not till after this kit. We've got another kit doing passenger side. So anyway, all right, let us get to starting the needle scale, see the extent of the total damage on this cross member. Now, a little bit more on the square tube and why we're using a square tube. If you look inside this frame, it's hard to see. There's a good probably ½ inch of dirt and debris inside that frame. The issue that these frames have is that this cross member here, you can see how low it is in the frame. It basically blocks off things from working out of the frame, which it is open back here, and there are no drain holes. Actually, the first hole in the bottom of the frame isn't until you get way up here, which is in front of this cross member. So up here, I guarantee the same sort of thing. There's just stuff filled up this void, so things can't work their way out of the frame. So you get anything in these holes, mud, sand, dirt. You can't even really wash it out with a hose or anything like that. So this, when we lined it up with that slot back there, will actually raise that cross member up and give us a pretty good area down there to be able to, for things to, one, hopefully naturally work out of the frame, or you can actually go in here, rinse out your frame, which is something that, you know, you really should do from time to time just to get all the debris out of there if you can. But unfortunately, a lot of the new frames, they just didn't put enough drainage in there for things to work out and for you to do that. So we're trying to go back in and recreate some of that. Now that we've got the inside of the frame cleaned out, well, we actually went and we did needle scale some of the frame here just to knock anything loose on the inside as well, and vacuumed it again, but you didn't see that here on the camera. We need to go in and start the installation process. We're going to start with the outside plates, because we're going to use the outside plates to basically line up the cross member. And to do that, we're going to use this slot back here. That slot will line up with the slot in the frame. So we're going to get those slots pretty well aligned. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to mark out the perimeter of this plate on the frame. We're going to go ahead and mark out the slot too. Then we're also, if you've got any hangover in this square, because the square is not exactly where the round tube was, you're going to need to mark that out, or at least go in and look at where you're going to need to clean up so that the tube will clear. So we'll do this on both outside plates, and then we will go ahead and we'll tack these in place and check our alignment with our tube. One thing to make sure is make sure that the bottom here, if you are, because one thing we didn't show earlier was the bottom plate that will actually go somewhere about right there. It goes farther forward than the outside plate, but it lines up with the inside plate, and you'll see that soon. Make sure that that's flush on the bottom if you do plan on installing that outside plate or the bottom plate. And we do plan on using that bottom plate because the frame on the driver's side is actually a little bit worse, and it has a little bit of a crack on the inside. So really going to need that bottom plate to make sure we tie those two together. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that the outside plate versus the inside plate will be offset. And partially that is because the inside of the frame ends right about here. So this plate will go farther up on the inside than the outside plate will. Now, for that, and when you do that, then you have to remember that you're going to want to weld down here to the frame. There won't be a bottom plate or anything for you to weld to, so you're going to need to clean up that bottom corner too for you to get these plates on there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, line these back up, tack them in place. Then we're also going to take our tube, and if you are capping your tube, we're going to go ahead, weld up the ends of our tube. And then once we get these tacked in place, the tube welded up, we'll go ahead and we'll check the fit up of our tube. All right, one important step that I always forget until I'm getting ready to start welding plates on the frame is creating some sort of barrier. See if I can show it right. Some sort of barrier between the new plates and the frame. And that's what we're going to do is we will use this zinc weld, which is an SEM product. We will put a link in the description. Highly recommend it. We use this all the time. We've used several different weld through primers, and this is one that we found works the best. Basically, we will coat the inside of the plate that we're going to be going up against the frame. We'll also coat the frame as well. What that will do is that will give us a barrier between the new metal and the old metal, and hopefully prevent any kind of rust occurring, because if you look around your frame, you're going to find anywhere that there's a couple of pieces of metal that come together, moisture can tend to sit in between them. That's where rust will really grow. So we're trying to prevent that. So we do really recommend this. So since I always forget till this point, what I need to do now is go, I will spray this area, spray the inside of the plates. I'll actually come back and I'll just clean up the very perimeter area of where I'm going to weld. We typically do that. You can weld directly through this, but we always try to clean up that little fine line there to make sure we got really good weld. But we'll go and do those, and then we will be back. Now you can see I've added a few C-clamps, and what we're doing is we're just trying to make sure we're clamping that outside plate up against the outside as flush as possible, right around where this cutout was, where the old cross member was, because what I want to do is now is I want to go in there and go ahead and try to weld the inside as much as possible where that cutout was to the new plate. Now we're going to do that really just on the outside plates. We won't be able to do that on the inside plates, because, you know, basically we'll have that outside plate in the way, and while the inside plate is off, we'll be able to get in there pretty well. Now what we did with the outside plates, we essentially have to do with the inside plates, but we also have to use the tube, make sure everything's lined up. As far as the direction of the plates, this angle goes on the bottom, should follow the bottom of the frame. Make sure you don't put them upside down. That would be a bad day. Now, as far as the bottom plate, we're going to show you the passenger side since it's we don't have the exhaust in the way. It'll be a lot easier. You're going to need some large C-clamps. You're going to have to do a couple things. You're going to want to probably clamp these two plates inward, because chances are you're going to have to close up a bit of a gap in there. You can also use a hammer and just roll these edges over a little bit. You definitely want to make sure you close up any gap. You got a couple of options. We find it easier to start up here and work backwards, and then just hard with one hand, basically get it tacked up right there, and then use a large C-clamp back there to clamp this right here to close up that there, since there is a little bit bend, and this plate will come to you flat. But again, you're gonna have to just basically use a lot of C-clamps and, you know, hammer these edges over to the to close up any gaps. You don't really want any gaps. And then up here you're gonna have to basically just weld that completely solid there, because this plate will end, it's kind of designed to end there, basically at the end of that frame. Now on the on the passenger side, there's slightly different setup. You will have this hanger here in the way. A lot of times we just will go in, grind that corner of that hanger, and then butt that up right against it. Really, being it's so close to right here at the edge, it's really not worth cutting it off. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could cut it off, weld it back to the bottom of that, but we'll go ahead and get that done, and hopefully you can see as much as possible as we work on it. This one's kind of a pain just because we're working overhead, really. All right, we've got all the plates on the sides burned in. We haven't welded on the tube at all yet. So what we're going to do now, though, is we're going to go ahead and get the tube tacked in place. So we have centered the tube basically on the frame. It's not a huge deal. If you're off a little bit, it doesn't really matter, because once you get it put in place, we're just going to mount this to it, mount our shock mount, and we'll measure that off the frame. So for this, we've gone in, and again, we've done the weld through primer here. We'll mark it out, we'll clean that up. We've gone and we ground on this plate as well. So we'll get those cleaned up, but first we're going to put some tacks here so our tube won't move, and then we can start solid welding that tube, solid welding this tire winch plate to it, and then we will talk about our shock mount over here. Now for the final stage, and let me apologize. It's actually a week later from the last part of this video because, well, I got sick. And yeah, I didn't really want to shoot the video. I did get other work done. I basically got, 10 other kits installed on this truck, but really wasn't thinking I'd be good at a video. So anyway, bear with me. Last step here, and this is mounting the shock brackets. Now the shock bracket is going to make up of 3 pieces. You're going to have an inside plate, an outside plate, and then a top plate. They'll basically cap everything off. The one big thing on this is make sure that you get the inside and outside plate right. This is supposed to be angled to the up and towards the front. So what we will do is we'll use the shock. We'll actually put a small washer inside of here. Go ahead, bolt it together. We just basically use the thinnest washer we can find, because you want a little bit of play in there. When you go to bolt this up, you don't want to have to try to pry them apart. It's not going to be fun. They will clamp down whenever you crank down on this. So basically getting that up there, making sure it lines up, and then get your 2 plates lined up, and pretty much the top here will be flush, but we make sure, you know, they line up on the tube just in case. And now we take it over to a bench and we will weld this in. Now we will typically weld it in and leave the shock attached. You could tack it together, pull the shock out. We've never had any issues with any of the heat, but if you do want to weld it on the inside, you will obviously have to take the shock out. But then once we get this all welded up, we'll be back and we'll get it installed on our tube. All right, we've got this welded up. We went ahead and we did remove the shock. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and get it located on the frame. Now, before we started cutting everything apart, we actually, that's a little bit hot. We actually measured where the original shock was. On this truck, the center of the shock was basically 3.5 inches off of the inside of the frame. So essentially just going to put it back in place. There, tack it in place. Now that we've got it lined up correctly, we'll go ahead and we'll solid weld it everywhere we can around that cross member. Now, as for finishing up with this kit, you need to coat it in some way. Now, we usually do one of 2 things. We will either use a heavy, a good prime, basically just a spray prime, and then a spray paint. We typically use a professional Rust-Oleum products for that. We just make sure, you know, if you do go that route, put a lot of mill thickness on there. You do want to protect the new material from starting to rust, obviously. And we use a prime and a top coat mainly to get both the edge coverage and that. God damn it. Let me start over. Now you've got to go in and actually finish this off by coating it somehow. We'll usually do one of 2 things. We'll either just use typically a spray paint, a good prime, a good top coat, go in there and get a really thick coat basically on it. You know, it's a frame, so not many people are going to see it, so you have to worry too much about runs and stuff, but we'll try to get a lot of paint on there to try to prevent rust as much as possible. One thing we don't do is we don't use any kind of rubberized undercoating on these, because that typically will help just to hold water in and just rust underneath it. The other option we do, and we've been doing a lot to customers' trucks, and this truck here is actually going to get the same treatment, is we've been using a rust converter and then a rust encapsulator, which is, I guess you could call an undercoat, but it's not like a rubberized undercoat. It's more like, people are more familiar with like Port 15. It's similar to that, let's say. Now, we use a SEM rust mort for our converter. It's a phosphoric acid-based rust converter that will take rust and converts it chemically back into steel, or removes that component that will cause it to continue to rust. So that's why it's a converter. We'll do that first to try to convert as much rust as we can, and then we come back and we we spray a rust trap, which is also an SEM product, and we'll put both of those in the description if you want to try those out. They're a little bit pricey, but we have found that they work really well. We'll spray that on this entire frame actually, and try to basically prevent any more rust, prevent as much rust from occurring as possible. We'll do that on the outside. We also have a long wand basically so that we can, with the fan on the end, so we can spray the inside of the frame and get as many places as possible. So check out the description for those. Check out the description for the link for this kit, and you can check out our website, taboocustoms.com. Now, thank you for watching. As always, a like or subscribe is greatly appreciated.